So far, we've been talking about cells almost as if all cells are the same. Well, that's just not the case. The main cell types we will deal with in this class are animal cells, plant cells, and bacteria. This is video 6.4 to compare and contrast the major cell types. This video will reinforce our earlier objectives, but the main focus is to compare those major cell types. Cells can be divided into two main categories, eukaryotic and prokaryotic. And what we've been learning about in the cells unit so far has been strictly eukaryotic cells. Eukaryotic cells have their own DNA contained in a nucleus and have the other membrane-bound organelles, but prokaryotic cells don't. Prokaryotes still have DNA, but the DNA is just clumped in one side of the cell, called the nucleoid region, not the nucleus. Prokaryotic cells also don't have membrane-bound organelles like mitochondria, ER, or even vesicles. And prokaryotic cells are pretty small. The easiest to remember prokaryotic cells are bacteria. And if you want to get all bougie, you could say a specific type of bacteria like E. coli. Eukaryotic cells are animal cells and plant cells, but also fungi like yeast and protists like paramecia and amoebas are eukaryotic too. Here's a picture that gives you a better understanding of the size difference between prokaryotes and eukaryotes. And this would even be a small eukaryotic cell. One thing that I want you to notice is that the eukaryote has a nucleus and the prokaryote just has a nucleoid region instead. Another thing that I really want to emphasize is that plant cells and animal cells are both eukaryotic. We'll compare plant cells and animal cells to each other a lot, and so it becomes easy to forget that they're both part of the same class of cells. And this little cute fella up here is our bacteria prokaryote. These three cells in particular are the focus of the cells we study in AP biology. One thing that's different about plant cells, fungi, and bacteria compared to animal cells is that all of those have cell walls and animal cells don't have cell walls. Famously, plant cells have cell walls made of cellulose, but the cell walls of other cell types are made of different substances, peptidoglycan for bacteria or chitin for fungi. Now, regardless of the substance that they're made of, cell walls are outside of the plasma membrane as shown in this figure, where the cell membrane is this white color and the plasma membrane sitting right on top is this kind of yellowish tan color. Another cool thing about cell walls is that cell walls have holes in them called plasmodesmata. As you can see in this figure, plasmodesmata connect adjacent plant cells. And those connections, those plasmodesmata, are useful because it allows plant cells to share materials from one cell to another, like these three plant cells that are joined by plasmodesmata at the bottom. This way, plants can communicate with each other and plant cells can communicate with each other and pass small molecules back and forth. Now, in addition to communication, cell walls provide a rigid structure to cells, and this is important in keeping the cells from bursting when they're put in a really watery environment. In the very first video of the cells unit, I told you that all cells have three jobs: make ATP, make proteins, and make other cells. Now, plant cells are no different. Plant cells make ATP, but plant cells make ATP two different ways. First off, plant cells make ATP the same way as animal cells, by cellular respiration. In doing cell respiration, plants work like animal cells. The first stage, glycolysis, happens in the cytoplasm. Then the aerobic stages of respiration happen in the mitochondria. Plants have mitochondria. I'll remind you again later. The other way plants make ATP is by photosynthesis. The ATP generating reactions in photosynthesis use light and water as reactants to make ATP and oxygen. Now, to help keep photosynthesis ATP making separate from cell respiration ATP making, a lot of people think about the ATP made during photosynthesis just being used to power the other reactions of photosynthesis, like it says down here. But the ATP made by respiration is used to power all the other processes in the cell. Since photosynthesis is a different process than we've seen thus far, we'll need some different organelles to carry that out. First are the chloroplasts, membrane-bound organelles that create compartments for the different reactions of photosynthesis. Also involved in photosynthesis are the central vacuoles, which store water, one of those big reactants for photosynthesis. The central vacuole also stores dissolved substances for other cell needs too. Let's consider how the unique structure of chloroplasts allows for the unique function of photosynthesis. Chloroplasts have a double membrane, as you can see in this diagram. Here's the outer membrane, and here's the inner membrane. And actually, all the action takes place inside of the inner membrane. In the internal compartment of chloroplasts, there are these stacks of structures called thylakoids right here, and thylakoids contain chlorophyll, the plant pigment that captures energy from the sun. And having all of these different membranes and compartments creates spaces that are ideal for the different reactions of photosynthesis. The first half of photosynthesis takes place on and in these thylakoids, and the second part of photosynthesis takes place in the stroma right here. I also want to take a sec to explain what vacuoles are all about. A lot of people use vacuoles and vesicles as interchangeable, and it's true that vacuoles and vesicles are almost the same thing. Both are found in eukaryotes, so plant and animal cells both have vacuoles and vesicles. Vacuoles just tend to be bigger than vesicles. And while vesicles, we said, are used for storing and moving substances, vacuoles tend to be used just for storage. Now, the central vacuole in plants is a very prominent organelle, and this is where plants store most of their water and dissolved substances. And when you water your plants, the central vacuole fills up and creates a lot of pressure in the plant cell. And that's why it's good to have a cell wall, so that all that pressure doesn't make the plant cell burst. So, wrapping up the story of plant cells making ATP, I want to say it again. Plants have mitochondria. When you compare plant cells and animal cells, it's easy to get confused and think that, well, since plants have chloroplasts, then they don't need mitochondria. And the truth is that mitochondria and chloroplasts have different jobs, and plants need to do both of those jobs to survive. Another job that plants need to do to survive is make proteins. Now, the protein story in plants is the same as what we learned for animal cells, and the list of organelles and their functions are the same here that we've seen before. Pause if you want to double check, but otherwise, I'm going to go on. Finally, plant cells make more cells. Plants do undergo mitosis too, and you could see the characteristic stages of mitosis in the diagrams. And there are only a few differences between plant cells and animal cells. One that you should know right now is that plant cells don't have centrioles here. Remember, in animal cells, the centrioles helped organize the ends of the dividing cell, and plant cells rely on other structures to help with that and mechanisms that are beyond what we need to know. And some aren't even known at all. Now, we couldn't get out of this video with talking a little bit more about prokaryotes, bacteria. Prokaryotes are relatively small cells that are unicellular organisms. Now, by definition, prokaryotes have no membrane-bound organelles and are generally simpler than eukaryotes. And this simplicity extends to DNA, which is organized in a single chromosome and doesn't get protected in a nucleus. But prokaryotes do have some structures worth noting. First, prokaryotes have ribosomes, a cell wall, and a cell membrane. And some prokaryotes, like cyanobacteria, can do photosynthesis, but they don't have chloroplasts. Bacteria that move around often use flagella to move, and these flagella whip around back and forth or twirl around to propel a bacteria forward through fluids. Just like all cells, prokaryotes make ATP, prokaryotes make proteins, and prokaryotes make more prokaryotic cells. But prokaryotes do all of this in one compartment, their cytoplasm. To make ATP, all of the enzymes prokaryotes need are in their cytoplasm. But if a prokaryote is aerobic, some of those enzymes are attached to their plasma membrane, but no mitochondria in prokaryotes. To make proteins, prokaryotes transcribe RNA from their DNA, but that DNA is not in the nucleus. And also, prokaryotes have ribosomes for translation, but all of those ribosomes are free, cytoplasmic ribosomes, because there is no ER in prokaryotes. And finally, prokaryotes make more cells, but prokaryotes divide by binary fission instead of mitosis. Binary fission is a much more simple process, but still gets the job done, as you can see over here on the right. So let's recap. In AP Bio, we need to know about two major cell groups, prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Prokaryotic cells are much smaller and simpler than eukaryotic cells because prokaryotes lack membrane-bound organelles. Plant cells, yeast cells, and prokaryotes have cell walls, that provide a rigid outer covering and keep the cell from bursting. All cells make ATP, but plant cells make ATP by respiration and photosynthesis. Photosynthesis requires specialized organelles called the chloroplasts. Prokaryotes also make ATP, but keep all the enzymes for those reactions in their cytoplasm or attach the enzymes to their membranes. All cells make proteins. Animal cells and plant cells use the same organelles, interacting in the same way, but prokaryotes just rely on free ribosomes in their cytoplasm. And finally, all cells make other cells. Plant cells and animal cells use mitosis. Bacteria use binary fission.